in the Shafi'i school is this book right here. And so it is a very beneficial book for the one who wants to get acquainted with the Shafi'i school. So alhamdulillah that we have been guided to al-Islam, which is the greatest endowment. And we, alhamdulillah, that we have been guided to have the knowledge of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, which is the only way that we can ensure that we are walking on the straight path, that we are following the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if you have a copy of the book, it's page 129, last paragraph. We reached up to the Maghrib prayer. So the author said, the Maghrib prayer starts when the sun sets and remains a time equal to the time which one needs to call the adhan, make wudu, cover one's awrah, make iqamah, and pray 5 rak'ahs. Footnote 203. According to this later saying of Ash-Shafi'i, there is a period between the end of Maghrib and the beginning of Isha where there is no obligatory prayer, but this later saying is weak. So what we see here is that one of the examples, one of the times in which it is stronger to follow the old school of Ash-Shafi'i is in this saying here. So in the old school of Ash-Shafi'i, the time of Maghrib, it lasts until these actions can be done. So the adhan, the wudu, covering one's unlawful nakedness, the iqamah, and praying 5 rak'ahs. So the time that it takes to pray, to do those actions, according to the new school of Ash-Shafi'i, this is the time of Maghrib, and that Maghrib ends after that passes. But according to that saying, once that time passes, it doesn't mean that immediately Isha comes in. There's a gap. So for the other prayer times we mentioned, there's no gap. As soon as Dhuhr ends, Asr begins. And the ending of Dhuhr marks the beginning of Asr. The ending of Asr marks the beginning of Maghrib. But here, according to this saying, that the Maghrib time is only these actions, then there is a gap between Maghrib and Isha. But of course this is weak, we say that what's stronger is to go according to the old school of Ash-Shafi'i, meaning that the Maghrib time is from the ending of Asr, from when the sun completely sets in the western horizon, until the redness in the western horizon sets. So that's the old saying. So we skipped over footnote 202. Footnote 202, the Maghrib prayer has these times: Waqtul Fadila, which is the prime time, and Waqtul Ikhtiyar, which is the next chosen time. They are at the beginning of the prayer time. Waqtul Jawaz is until the redness disappears below the western horizon. Waqtul Udhur is when it is prayed during the Isha time, when one is combining the prayer while traveling, for example. And Waqtul Darura is when the prohibitive matter terminates while there is enough time to say Allahu Akbar. And Waqtul Hurma is when one delays praying without an excuse until part of the 3 rak'ahs are prayed during Maghrib and the remaining occur after the Maghrib has ended. And so generally speaking, the Maghrib prayer is relatively short. It's so basically the person, once they're sure Maghrib is in, they should go to pray. And continuing on, when Jibreel prayed with the Prophet ﷺ on both days, he prayed at the beginning of its time, not like he did for the Dhuhr. That is, on the second day he delayed it, and likewise when he prayed the Asr. So remember when we mentioned that Angel Jibreel alayhi salam, when he came to teach the Prophet ﷺ the prayer times, he came one day, the first day, he came at the beginning of the time to show the Prophet ﷺ when the time begins. And then the second day he came at the end of the time, to show the Prophet ﷺ when the prayer time ends. And he did the same thing for the Asr. For the Maghrib prayer on both days, Angel Jibreel alayhi salam led the Prophet ﷺ in the prayer at the beginning of its time. So that shows you, for the Maghrib time, it should be prayed as soon as the person, or the person shouldn't think that he has an ample amount of time to pray the Asr, and he shouldn't take it like the Dhuhr, he shouldn't take it like the Asr, where it's an ample time. Rather, he should pray it as soon as he knows that the time is in, and he should not delay it. And so one thing that shows this is that on both days for the Maghrib prayer, Angel Jibreel alayhi salam, he came at the same time. He didn't come, for example, at the beginning of the time, and then the second day he came at a later time. Now, then the author said, this is why, it says, it is sunnah to pray 2 rak'ahs after the Maghrib prayer. This is why they said, and time to pray 5 rak'ahs. Imam al-Shafi'i had 2 sayings pertaining to the end time of the Maghrib prayer. According to his old school, which he authored in Iraq, he said, the Maghrib prayer remains until the disappearance of the redness in the western horizon. According to this saying, the Maghrib time is longer than what was mentioned. According to the new school of al-Shafi'i, which is authored in Egypt, he said, the time ends after one is able to call the adhan, make wudu, cover one's awrah, make iqamah, and pray 5 rak'ahs. This time is tighter. So some scholars followed the new saying, but this saying is the weak one. The Shafi'i scholars give fatwa in this issue according to the old school of al-Shafi'i, because his old saying is stronger as far as the proof is concerned. This is so because Muslim narrated from the Prophet ﷺ that he said what means Maghrib time remains until the redness in the western horizon disappears. So this gives you an insight into the fundamentals of the Islamic law. And so what is our basis in the Islamic law? How do we judge as Muslims these matters? Every single matter that is related to this dunya, how do we judge it about whether it's permissible or not permissible, whether it's valid or invalid, whether it's recommended or not recommended? We judge according to what was conveyed from the Prophet ﷺ. So if this issue, if this matter, has a confirmed narration, we go by it. If it doesn't have a confirmed narration, but there's other factors that they support one way or the other, from the Prophet's actions, from his sayings, from what is confirmed, not specifically that it was specifically mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ, but there are matters or issues that support that judgment. This is the duty of the mujtahid. The mujtahid is the one who uses these religious proofs to come up with the judgment. So al-Shafi'i, in his new school, he came up with that judgment. And in the old school, his proofs that he used to determine the ending of the Maghrib prayer are stronger, which is what it is that the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, Maghrib time remains until the redness in the western horizon disappears. So because of that, the judgment or the proof for the Maghrib time being until the redness disappears is stronger. In regards to the beginning of the Maghrib time, when it is said that its time starts when the sun sets, what is meant by the sun setting is that the whole disk of the sun sets. If only part of the sun sets, then the time of Maghrib is not in yet. If one lives in an area in which there are mountains, one checks the peaks of those mountains. If the rays of the sun are still on the peaks of the mountains, this means that Maghrib time is not in yet if one cannot see the disk of the sun anymore. Once the Maghrib time ends, immediately after that, the Isha time starts. There is no time separating the two, based on the saying that Maghrib ends when the redness in the western horizon disappears. So, now for us, let's say we don't live in a mountainous area. We live in a place where there's buildings, and so our vision or our view of the horizon would be blocked by buildings, by houses, by trees, etc. So then how do we judge that Maghrib is in? That same way. We look at the eastern horizon. When we see the darkness approaching from the eastern horizon, then we judge that Maghrib is in. When the sun rays, they disappear from the peaks of those, let's say, tall buildings, then we know that the Maghrib is in. Then page 131, top of the page. The Isha time starts by the disappearance of the redness in the western horizon. So footnote 204, the author said, the Isha prayer has different times. Waqtul Fadila, which is at the beginning of the prayer time, and it is better to wait until the yellowishness and whiteness disappear from the western horizon. This is to avoid the difference in opinion amongst the scholars. And what they're referring to here is the difference in opinion between Al-Imam al-Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu and Al-Imam Abu Hanifa. Because like we said, according to the old school of al-Shafi'i, the time starts, the Maghrib time ends when the redness disappears in the western horizon. And that's when the Isha time starts. There's no gap. According to al-Shafi'i, according to the old saying. However, according to Al-Imam Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu, the Maghrib prayer extends until the whiteness disappears in the western horizon. And then that's when the Isha starts. So if someone goes strictly according to al-Shafi'i, and he prays Isha after the redness disappears in the western horizon, then according to Abu Hanifa, his prayer is not valid. He has not prayed Isha, because according to him, Isha hasn't started yet. So that's what the author meant when he said it is better to wait until the yellowness and whiteness disappear. He's referring to the redness. Then there's Waqtul Ikhtiyar, is until the third of the night. This is the next best time after prime time. Waqtul Jawaz is until the true Fajr. So it's permissible to pray the Isha up until the true dawn appears. Waqtul Udhur is when it is prayed during the Maghrib time when one is combining the prayer while traveling, for example. Waqtul Hurma is when one delays praying it without an excuse until a part of the 4 rak'ahs are prayed during the Isha time and the remaining occur after the Isha time has ended. So like we said, if someone delays praying the prayer until there's not enough time for him to pray the minimum amount of the prayer, then the person is sinful. If he delayed that without an excuse. And we said if he at least does 1 rak'ah within the prayer time, then it's counted as on time and not as a makeup. But still, if the person delayed until that point where he's not able to pray the entire prayer, the minimum amount of the entire prayer within the prayer time, then this is called that he has committed a sin. This is called Waqtul Hurma. He has prayed the prayer during the time, the prohibited time, the time where he would get a sin for praying it in that time. Waqtu Darura is when the prohibitive matter terminates while there's enough time to say Allahu Akbar. Waqtu Karaha, according to some Shafi'i scholars, like Al-Ghazali, who said that if it is prayed between the false dawn and the true dawn. So, according to some Shafi'i imams, some Shafi'i jurists, they said that it's disliked to pray the Isha prayer in between the false dawn and the true dawn. طيب, back to the top. The Isha time starts by the disappearance of the redness. Footnote 205. If one is in a country where the redness and whiteness do not disappear below the horizon until Fajr time, or in a country without any redness or whiteness, no shafaq, then the beginning of the Isha prayer time for the people in that area is determined by applying the duration of time for the Maghrib prayer in a country nearest to them and applying that to themselves. Meaning they add that amount of time after their sunset to determine when is the beginning of their Isha time. Those are some special details. If you ever live in a country that that there is no redness or whiteness at all, or the redness and whiteness, they appear but they remain there until the Fajr, then there's a way to know the prayer time. Yani there's a way for the Muslim to be able to pray on time. So here the author says, the Isha time starts by the disappearance of redness in the western horizon, and the preferred time remains until the end of the first third of the night. But its time remains until the true dawn appears. Footnote 206. It is disliked to sleep before praying the Isha prayer and before the Isha prayer time enters. So the Muslim, he should wait until Isha is in, and then he should he should wait until he's sure Isha is in, then he should pray it immediately, and then he should go to sleep. And then he should wake up sometime before the Fajr to do Qiyam al-Layl, to pray the prayer after waking up at night, and that's not an obligation. The author said, so once the redness disappears from the western horizon, the Isha time is in. The best time to pray Isha is at the beginning of its time. If one misses that, then let one pray it during the beginning of the first third of the night, because this is the preferred time to pray it within. Like we mentioned, the prime time is right when it's in. Then after the prime time, there's the next best time. And for the case of Isha, it's until the first third of the night ends. How do we know when's the third of the night? You count the hours between when Maghrib starts and when the Fajr starts, and you divide it by 3. And the first third is the first third of the night. Then the author said, if one delays it more than that, more than the first third of the night, it is permissible because its time remains until the dawn appears. But some scholars said it is disliked to delay it until the first dawn, until the false dawn appears. The first dawn, they're referring to al-Fajr al-Kadhib, the false dawn. It is of course sinful to delay it until there is not enough time to finish it within its time. If one prays 1 rak'ah of it within its time, then it is not considered a make-up prayer. It is permissible to bring it forward and to pray it after praying the Maghrib prayer within the Maghrib time for an excuse such as traveling. So just like for the Dhuhr and the Asr, same thing applies for the Maghrib and the Isha. The time of the Subh prayer starts when the true dawn appears, and its preferred time ends with the spreading of the light. Footnote 207. The Subh Fajr prayer has different times. Waqtul Fadila, prime time, is at the beginning of the prayer. And after that is Waqtul Ikhtiyar, until the yellowish light in the eastern horizon. I would say appears in the eastern horizon. Looks like there's a typo there. Or missing text. So I think he meant to say until the yellowish light appears in the eastern horizon. Waqtul Jawaz without karaha is from the yellowish light until the redness appears. Waqtul Jawaz with karaha is from the redness light until sunrise. Waqtul Hurma is when one delays praying without an excuse until a part of the 2 rak'ahs is prayed during the Fajr time, and the remaining occur after the Fajr time has ended. Waqtu Darura is when the prohibitive matter terminates, while there is enough time to say Allahu Akbar. So those are the times for the Fajr prayer. So imagine being asked, state all the times of each prayer. And not just when it ends and when it starts, but like in detail. Or and they won't even, for example, you gotta catch on to the question. So they'll say, for example, state the prayer times, give details. اذكر أوقات الصلوات الخمس فصل. Give, mention all the prayer times, give detail. That's what the test question would have. MashaAllah. So for example, if you answered that question and you said, for example, the dhuhr begins when the sun starts to decline westward from the middle of the sky, and it ends when the shadow of an object is the same length as the object plus the shadow of the zenith, and the Asr time starts when the dhuhr ends, and it ends, and the Asr ends when the sun completely sets in the western horizon, and the Maghrib starts when the Asr ends, and the Maghrib ends when the redness disappears in the western horizon, and the Isha starts when Maghrib ends, and the Isha ends when the true dawn appears. If you answered like that in the test, then you're getting some points for that question, but not full points. And you would think, wow, I answered the question, etc. But no, what the teacher wanted you to say is the dhuhr is beginning time when the sun declines westward from the middle of the sky, and it ends when the shadow of an object is the size of the object plus the shadow of the zenith. And the dhuhr has 7 times, and the dhuhr has 6 times. The prime time, which is at the beginning, the next preferred time, which is such and such, etc. So that's what the detail that they wanted. So literally, that one question maybe takes you have to write a whole page. MashaAllah. May Allah have mercy upon the students of knowledge. Ameen. طيب. Now, continuing on with the main text. The time of the subuh prayer starts when the true dawn appears, and its preferred time ends with the spreading of the light. The end of the subuh time is with the sunrise. So when we say sunrise, and it means that part of the sun has appeared in the horizon. Not that the complete sun has risen, but just that a part of the sun has peaked over the horizon. So immediately when the Isha time ends, the Subh time starts with no separation between the 2 times. When the true dawn appears, this means that the Isha time ended and the Subh time started. The true dawn is the horizontal light that appears in the eastern horizon. It starts thin, and then it gets larger and larger, and it spreads more and more. It starts white with a little bit of redness, and before the sun rises, the redness becomes much stronger. The false dawn, which comes before it, is not a sign for the start of the subuh time. It is a light which is vertical, similar to the tail of the wolf. It appears and then it disappears, and darkness follows it. This is called the false dawn, al-fajr al-kadhib. It appears and then it disappears, and darkness follows it. Then after that, the true dawn appears. The best time to pray the subuh prayer is at the beginning of its time. Imam Malik, in his book Al-Muwatta, narrated from one of the companions that they used to pray the subuh prayer with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Al-Madinah, and they used to pray the subuh prayer, and they used to go out of the masjid without them being able to know who the person is who is walking away from them. Meaning it was before the light spread. Allahu Akbar. And so right at the beginning of subuh. Hence, if that is what they did, it means they prayed at the beginning of the time, and they finished and went out before the light spread. The spread of the light means to a point that if there is a person whom you know, and this person is 50 cubits away from you, you can identify him. This is what is meant by the spread of the light, al-isfar. If one does not pray subuh until the redness becomes very strong, and then prays before the sun rises, then it is disliked to do on purpose. So, and that's the difference of opinion also, and as far as the isfar, between the Shafi'i school and the Hanafi school. And in the Hanafi school, they wait until the light spreads, until al-isfar. But in the Shafi'i school, the best is to pray at the beginning of the time. When the redness becomes very strong, but before the sun rises, it is disliked to do this on purpose. The time of subuh remains until the sun rises, which means until the first part of the sun appears. When the first part of the sun appears, this means the subuh time has ended. If someone lives in an area where there are mountains in the eastern horizon, one does not say, I still have time to pray subuh until the sun appears from behind the mountain. Rather, one assumes if there were no mountains, when would the first part of the sun appear? So at that time, this is when the subuh ends. Of course, if someone delays praying subuh until a time which is not enough to pray all of it within its time, then this is sinful. Still, if one prays one rak'ah within its time, it would not be considered a make-up prayer. So we repeated that rule for each of the prayers. The time of dhuhr does not start immediately when the time of subuh ends. Rather, there is a separation between these two times. So alhamdulillah, by that we finished the prayer times. As you see, there's many details involved, and this is just scratching the surface, because like we said, this is a beginner's book in the Shafi'i school. Now we're going to move on to a different chapter, which is what makes prayer obligatory and the recommended Sunnah prayers. Does anyone have a question before moving on to the next chapter? Okay, someone is asking for the classifications of the prayer times for Maghrib. So we're going to mention those again. So for the Maghrib prayer, it has Waqtul Fadila, which is prime time, the beginning of the time, and Waqtul Ikhtiyar, they're kind of together. Then there's Waqtul Jawaz, until the redness disappears below the western horizon. So until the end of the time, which is the permissible time. And then the rest of them are Waqtul Udhr and Waqtul Hurma and Waqtul Darura. So if you want to classify one way, technically Maghrib has three. The first two put together, and then the last one until the prayer time, the prime time and the preferred time kind of together, combined. And then the permissible time, which is until the redness disappears. And then you have the Waqtul Udhr, which is the time of the excuse, like when the traveler prays Maghrib during the time of Isha, because he delayed. Then you have Waqtul Darura, which is the time when the prohibitive matter terminates, like for the one moment it takes to say Allahu Akbar. And the last is Waqtul Hurma, which is the time that is not enough to pray the minimum amount of the prayer in its time. So those are for the Maghrib. Are there any others for other prayers that need to be repeated? For all of the prayers, for Dhuhr and Asr and Isha and Subuh. For Maghrib, yes, we just did. For Maghrib, we have Waqtul Fadila and Waqtul Ikhtiyar. These are together at the beginning of the prayer time. And we have Waqtul Jawaz, which is until the redness disappears. Then we have Waqtul Udhr, And waqtul jawaz means the permissible time. Waqtul udhr means the time of an excuse, which is the Isha time for the one who's traveling. And then we have waqtul darura, which is the necessary time or the time of necessity, like when the woman's period ends and there's only enough time to say Allahu Akbar. And then we have waqtul hurma, which is the prohibited time, which is the time that is not enough to pray the minimum amount of the prayer. That's for Maghrib. So if you want, you can say Maghrib has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first two are combined together. Then you have the permissible time, and then the other three are for the rest of the prayers except subuh. And for subuh, you don't have waqtul udhr. There's no time where like you can delay subuh to another time if you're traveling. But for dhuhr and asr, that time exists. And for maghrib and isha, that time exists. Does that answer your question? Wafikum. طيب, so now, are there any others before we move on to the next chapter? What makes the prayer obligatory and the recommended sunnah prayers? So now we're going to read the text. 3 conditions make prayer obligatory: Islam, puberty, and sanity. And that is the scope of accountability. There are 5 recommended sunnah prayers: the prayers of the 2 Eids, for the 2 eclipses, and for seeking the rain. The sunnah rak'ahs that accompany the obligatory prayers are 17. The 2 rak'ahs of Fajr, 4 before Dhuhr, and 2 after, 4 before Asr, 2 after Maghrib, and 3 after Isha, one of which is the Witr prayer. 3 voluntary prayers are emphasized: the night prayer, the Duha prayer, and the Taraweeh prayer. Now we're going to go to the explanation. First, let's go to the footnote 208. Footnote 208. Optional and recommended. Yani when we say the sunnah, it means optional and recommended. طيب. Now below the line is the explanation. The conditions for the prayer to be an obligation on the person are 3 matters: Islam, puberty, and sanity. And this is what makes the person accountable for the prayer. Footnote 209. The prayer has integrals and it has conditions. The conditions are related either to the validity or obligation or rewardability. Number 1, conditions of validity, matters that are required for the validity of the prayer. Number 2, shurut wujub, for the prayer to be obligatory on one, for example, to be sane. And these are the conditions for it to be an obligation. And then number 3, shurut qabul, the conditions for the prayer to be accepted, for one to receive reward for one's prayer. The author did not want to confine the conditions to just these 3. There are more than these 3, like to be pure from menses and postpartum bleeding. The female in the state of menses or postpartum bleeding is not obligated to pray while in that state. Obligatory can mean to be ordered with something, or it can mean one will be punished for leaving it out. Wujub mutalabah or wujub iqab. Alright, cool. So this is just some special terminology, special details regarding the fundamentals. Now we're going to go on to the, continuing on with the text. This means that it is a condition for one to be Muslim for us to order him or her to perform the prayers as an obligation. So if the person is a kafir, we do not order him to perform the prayer because it is not valid from him. Yani we don't order him to perform the prayer as he is in his state of kufr. We tell him, embrace Islam and then pray. Rather, we order him to embrace Islam and then to perform the prayers. But still that kafir is accountable for the prayers in the meaning that he is going to be punished in the hereafter for not having prayed them, just as he is going to be punished for his blasphemy, because he could have embraced Islam and then prayed, but he chose not to do it until he died in the state of blasphemy. This is why he deserves to be punished for his blasphemy and leaving out the prayer. This means that the blasphemers deserve to be punished in the hereafter for leaving out doing the matters which they would have been ordered to do as obligations had they been Muslims. These matters are like prayers, fasting, and other issues. The proof for that are the verses, مَا سَلَكَكُمْ فِي سَقَرٍ قَالُوا لَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ. These verses mean that the blasphemers are going to be asked in the hereafter what means, for what matters are you being punished in hellfire? And their answer, they are going to mention leaving out praying. And in their answer, they are going to mention leaving out praying. So they are addressed with the rules of the religion and not just with the matters of belief. Still, it is clear, we do not order the blasphemers to pray because the prayer is not valid from them while they are still in the state of blasphemy. First, they have to embrace Islam. And what does that mean? That means that if someone is a non-Muslim, we don't tell him, hey, come on, join the prayer line so you can see what it feels like to be a Muslim, so you can get a feel for how it is to be a Muslim. No. You tell them, this is a serious matter. The deen and the rules of the religion and our obligations, these are not playthings. These are not things to be taken lightly. So the person, he should embrace Islam and pray, and if he really wants to pray, not just pretend. So it's not valid or permissible, it's sinful to tell a non-Muslim to stand with us in the prayer line and to say Allahu Akbar and to bow and to make sujood. This is haram because it's not valid from him. Same thing for the fasting. Then the author said, paragraph 2, the second condition is for one to be pubescent, because the one who is not pubescent is not obligated to perform the prayers. He is not accountable. This is so because Ahmad, Abu Dawood, and others narrated from the Prophet ﷺ that he said what means the pen is lifted from 3 people. That is, there are 3 types of people whom the angels do not write sins for. Then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the first type is the non-pubescent person until he becomes pubescent. The second type is the insane person until he becomes sane. And the third type is the one who is sleeping until he wakes up. Although it is not an obligation upon the non-pubescent child to perform the prayer, yet the guardian of that child is obligated to order him or her with praying if the child reached the level of mental discrimination, tamyiz. So we'll read 2:10. Yundab, for the male and female child to make up their missed prayers, which means that it's encouraged religiously, recommended, which they miss when they were in the state of mental discrimination and prior to becoming pubescent. It says pubescence, it says prior to becoming pubescence, but that's a typo that needs to be fixed. This is a good habit for the guardians, the father, mother, grandfather, and grandmother, to encourage the child to do. So like we said, in order for the prayer to be an obligation upon the person, they have to be accountable. In order for the person to be accountable, they have to be sane and pubescent, and they have to receive the basic message of Islam. And in order for the prayer to be valid, the person has to be a Muslim. So if there's a Muslim that's non-pubescent, he's not accountable yet. He himself is not obligated to pray. So if he leaves out the prayer, he himself is not sinful. Nothing gets written against him. He doesn't get a sin written on him in his record. If he dies before he becomes pubescent, on Judgment Day, he's not going to be judged. If after he becomes pubescent, he prays while being pubescent, but he didn't make up that prayer that he missed while he was not pubescent, he is not going to be judged for it on Judgment Day. But the parents, the guardians of that prepubescent child, who has reached the age of mental discrimination, tamyiz, they would be held accountable for not ordering their mumayyiz, 7 lunar year old prepubescent child to pray. So the sin would be on the guardians and not on the prepubescent child because he's not accountable. So not accountable means they don't get a sin. If the child is 7 years old and has not yet reached the level of mental discrimination, the guardian does not order the child to pray because the prayer is not valid from the one who is not in the state of mental discrimination. Footnote 211. At the age of 7 lunar years, if the child reached mental discrimination, the guardian should order the child to pray. It is an obligation on the guardian to order the child with prayers. And whoever took the basic obligatory knowledge, they would know this information. And obviously, we're giving this material under that understanding that the person who is taking this material, and they're acquainted with these basic subjects. So you don't have to explain everything again. The third condition is to be sane, because the insane person is not accountable for praying. The one who faints is like the one who is insane. He is not accountable for leaving out the prayers while in that state. So if someone fainted, right, and so he's breathing, right, he's still alive, he still has a heartbeat, he still has a pulse, but he's just asleep, and he stays that way for a decade, then when he comes back to consciousness, he's not obligated to make anything up, any of those that he missed after the time that he fainted. And only he would have to make up the prayer that he was in that prayer time when the fainting occurred, and enough time passed for him to be able to pray the whole prayer. And it's just like the case of the woman who's on her period. If her period starts, let's say half an hour after Dhuhr begins, then when her period ends, she has to make up that Dhuhr prayer. So if the person fainted, let's say half an hour after Dhuhr started, and then he wakes up 10 years later, he just has to make up that Dhuhr prayer that he missed when he fainted. As for the apostate, murtad, that is the person who was a Muslim but then became a kafir, non-Muslim, we do not order him to pray while he is still a blasphemer, but once he re-embraces Islam. He is obligated to make up the prayers which he missed while he was a kafir, even if he was doing the format of the prayer while he was a kafir, because they were not valid from him. He needs to make them up. In this case, there's a difference between the murtad and the original kafir. The original kafir, when he embraces Islam, he is not obligated to make up the prayers which he missed while he was a kafir. This rule makes it easier for him to embrace Islam, because he knows that he does not have to make up the prayers he missed. Yani it's an incentive for the person to embrace. Moreover, there is a condition, which is for the woman not to be in the state of having menses or postpartum bleeding, because the woman who is in that state is not obligated to perform the prayers. There are different types of optional prayers. One type is the optional prayer, which is Sunnah, to pray in congregation. The author mentioned 5 of the Sunnah prayers. Footnote 212. The author mentioned 5 of the Sunnah prayers, but there are more than that. The author mentioned these 5 because they are highly confirmed, and they are prayed in congregation. The prayers of the 2 Eid, the prayer of the eclipse of the sun and the eclipse of the moon, and the prayer for seeking the rain. The optional Sunnah prayers, which are related to the obligatory prayers, are 17 rak'ahs. So footnote 214. The Sunnah, which are related to the obligatory prayers. These are called in Arabic al-rawatib. And these are the Sunnah prayers that are designated to be prayed with the obligatory prayers. They are 17 rak'ahs. Footnote 214. The Sunnah prayers that are related to the obligatory prayers are 17 rak'ahs. They are also known as Sunnatul Ratibah. The author did not mention the Duha prayer because it is not related to the 5 obligatory prayers. They are 17 rak'ahs by counting the witr as one of them, because one cannot pray the witr if one does not pray the Isha. So praying the witr is dependent upon praying the Isha. Hence, it is including in these 17 rak'ah. Oh, there's a typo here too. It is included. It should say it is included in these 17 rak'ahs. These 17 rak'ahs differ from the prayers which were mentioned previously in that it is not sunnah to pray prayers which are sunnah to pray, in that it is not sunnah to pray them in congregation. So the difference between these rawatib, these sunnatul ratiba, the difference between these prayers, these 17 rak'ahs that we mentioned, and the other prayers that we mentioned, the 2 Eids, etc. The difference is that these prayers that are related to the obligatory prayer, these sunnah prayers that are related to the obligatory prayer, they are not recommended to be prayed in congregation. So it's not sunnah to pray them together, yani in congregation. But those other ones are the 2 Eids, the eclipse prayers, etc. I don't know about that. The author said, so the author started by mentioning, these 17 rak'ah differ from the prayers which were mentioned previously in that it is not sunnah to pray them in congregation. So the author started by mentioning 5 types of prayers which are sunnah to pray in congregation, and then he mentioned 17 rak'ahs which are related to the obligatory prayers and contingent upon them, but they are not sunnah to pray in congregation, except when praying the tarawih in Ramadan. For it is sunnah to pray the witr after them in congregation. So these 17 rak'ahs are 2 rak'ah of al-fajr. It is sunnah to pray 2 rak'ah before the fajr subh prayer. Footnote 215. The 2 rak'ah before the fajr prayer was mentioned first because it is the most preferred sunnah prayer among them after sunnatul witr. The Prophet ﷺ said about this sunnah prayer that it is better than this world and what is in it. 4 rak'ah before the obligatory dhuhr prayer and 2 rak'ah after it. This is sunnah because Al-Bukhari and Muslim narrated that the Prophet ﷺ used to pray 4 rak'ahs before praying the dhuhr prayer and 2 rak'ah after it. 4 rak'ah before the asr. This is so because Ibn Hibban narrated that the Prophet ﷺ made a special supplication for the one who prays 4 rak'ahs after the asr prayer, 2 rak'ahs after the maghrib prayer. Footnote 216. It is also sunnah to pray 2 rak'ahs before the maghrib prayer. This is so because Muslim narrated that the Prophet ﷺ used to pray 2 optional rak'ahs after the maghrib prayer, 3 rak'ahs after the Isha prayer. Footnote 217. It is sunnah to pray 2 rak'ahs and then one intends the sunnah of the witr. 1 rak'ah is the minimum and 11 is the maximum, and performing 3 rak'ah of the witr is better than 1, and 5 rak'ah is better than 3, and 7 is better than 5, and 9 is better than 7, and 11 is better than 9 rak'ah. The one who exceeds 1 rak'ah of al-witr can pray them separately or continuously. To separate means to pray the last rak'ah by separating it from the one before. Like if one prays 10 rak'ah with 1 ihram and the last rak'ah with ihram. This is considered separately. To separate is better. The time of the witr prayer starts after praying the Isha prayer and remains until the fajr time starts. So if one is combining the prayer with the maghrib and hence prays the Isha during the time of the maghrib, then the witr can be prayed during the maghrib time after praying the Isha prayer. It is sunnah to pray the witr prayer towards the end of the night. So if a person wakes up to pray tahajjud, it is best to pray the witr after praying the tahajjud prayers. Naam. And some detail there about the witr prayer. 3 rak'ah after the Isha prayer, one of which would be the witr prayer. This is so because Muslim narrated from the Prophet ﷺ that he used to pray 3 optional rak'ahs after the Isha prayer. Footnote 218. The confirmed sunan rak'ah from above that are related to the obligatory prayers are 10. They were confirmed in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ was consistent in performing these 10. 2 rak'ahs before the fajr, 2 before the dhuhr, 2 after the dhuhr, 2 rak'ahs after the Maghrib and 2 after the Isha. Those are called al-mu'akkadah, the emphasized, confirmed Sunnah. The author said, as for the witr prayer, in several hadith, the Prophet ﷺ urged the people to pray it to a point that Abu Hanifa considers it wajib. However, Ash-Shafi'i and most of the scholars consider the witr prayer an optional prayer, which the Prophet ﷺ was always keen on performing. They do not consider it an obligation, because the proofs for that are strong. The prayers, and there was a man that came to the Prophet ﷺ and he asked him about what is his obligation to pray. And the Prophet ﷺ told him 5 prayers. And so then after the Prophet ﷺ told the man what are the obligations, that man swore by Allah that he will not do anything more or less. And the Prophet ﷺ said about that man, he is successful if he's truthful. He would be prosperous if he's truthful. He didn't say he'll be falling short. They do not. The least number of rak'ahs to pray the witr is 1. The time of the witr starts by finishing the Isha prayer and remains until the true dawn appears. If one prays the witr before the Isha, it is not considered that one prayed the witr. There are 3 additional optional prayers. Footnote 219. There are 3 confirmed optional prayers that are not tied to the 5 obligatory prayers. The best among them are in the following order: the Taraweeh prayer, the Duha prayer, and the night prayer. The author said, there are 3 additional optional prayers which the Prophet ﷺ was always keen to perform. The night prayer, Tahajjud, which is the recommended prayer that is prayed after sleeping, the Duha prayer, and the Taraweeh prayer. What is meant by the night prayer is to pray for the sake of Allah at night after praying the Isha prayer, even if one does not sleep after praying Isha and then wakes up to pray. So Qiyamul Layl is not specific to praying after sleeping. So Qiyamul Layl can just be any Sunnah prayer that is prayed after Isha at night. But the Tahajjud specifically is referring to a Sunnah prayer that is prayed after sleeping. No. No, versus Taraweeh. Yeah. The other said, however, it is good to divide the night into 3 parts. To sleep half of the night, then to wake up and pray 1/3 of it, and then to sleep the remaining 1/6 of it. So if someone's night is 6 hours, he sleeps 3 hours, then wakes up and prays 2 hours, and then he sleeps 1 hour. If the person wants to pray in either the first half or the second half of the night, it is better for him to pray in the second half. Okay, so we see how the awliya, how they are trained. They train themselves. But so this is something that you can do gradually. You can start by first, let's say, praying 4 hours and then praying a little bit and then going back to sleep. Not praying for 2 hours, but just praying for a couple of hours and then, sleeping for a couple of hours and then waking up to pray and then going back to sleep. And then gradually work your way up to sleeping 3 hours, then praying for 2 hours, and then sleeping for 1 hour. If the person but if the person knows about himself that if he goes to sleep, he will not wake up until after the subuh is in, then let him pray before going to sleep. So here there's a detail. The Muslim is heavily encouraged to pray these sunnah prayers. But if he can, if he's able to do, and he has the option, let's say, he's able to pray in the first half of the night or the second half, then what's better is for him to choose the second half. But if he knows that if he goes to sleep after praying Isha, he's not going to wake up until Fajr, then it's better for him to pray the recommended prayers before he falls asleep. Yani in the first half of the night, first part of the night. So if the night is 8 hours, then the second half is after 4 hours. 4 hours after Maghrib. Tahajjud is any time after you wake up, after you pray Isha and go to sleep, is Tahajjud. The Sahar, waqt al-Sahar. So the blessed time, the Sahar, is the last third. No, Qiyamul Layl is any Sunnah prayer prayed after Isha. Tahajjud is any Sunnah prayer that is prayed after waking up after praying Isha and going to sleep. Doesn't matter. 221. Oh wait, let's go to 220. Footnote 220. The night prayer is done after praying the Isha prayer. The Tahajjud prayer is done after sleeping. And the term night prayer is more general than that. There's a typo here. It says then, T-H-E-N. It should be T-H-A-N. So the night prayer is more general than that. So night prayer encompasses Tahajjud. Yani. So every Tahajjud prayer is a night prayer, but not every night prayer is a Tahajjud prayer. The Tahajjud prayer is no way. Then it says, it includes the Sunnah prayer after the Isha prayer. The author here intended the Tahajjud prayer. No, that part is confusing. If the author intended here the Tahajjud prayer, then here it says what is meant by the night prayer is to pray for the sake of Allah after praying Isha, even if one does not sleep after Isha, and then wakes up to pray. So that's confusing. Could be he meant the author of the original text and the metin. Let me see what the metin says. If the text that we're explaining, if it mentions night prayer. Yes. So the author in the text, he says night prayer, and so the explainer, he's saying what the author meant when the author said the night prayer, he's referring specifically to Tahajjud. Footnote 221, here, naflu al-mutlaq, let's see where it is, okay. 221, where is it? Okay. Where it says it is better for him to pray in the second half. 221. Here, nafl mutlaq is a prayer that is done during the night without sleeping before it. The optional prayers done during the nighttime are better than the optional prayers done during the daytime because it is further away from insincerity. I need to pray at night. For the one who divides the night in two halves, it is better to pray the night prayer in the second half. The one who divides the night into 6 parts sleeps the first half, 3/6, and prays the 4th and 5th 6th, and sleeps the last 6th. The Prophet ﷺ used to sleep the last 6th of the night different from the first half of the night. He used to sleep on his right side with his right forearm upright, holding his honorable head. He did that to be ready for the Fajr prayer. MashaAllah. Well, the Prophet, his wudu is not broken by sleep because his heart remains awake. Like when you lean on your side and you just go like that. No, like with your elbow. No, like leaning on your side. Let me see if I can do this. You don't want to say it, but now. Continuing on with the explanation. But if he knows about himself that if he goes to sleep, he will not wake up until after the subuh is in, then let him pray before going to sleep. The night prayer is performed in pairs of 2 rak'ah, because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that this is how one prays at night the optional prayers, 2 after 2. If he fears that the Fajr is going to enter, then he prays 1 rak'ah, and this is for the witr prayer. As for the duha prayer, its time starts when the sun becomes as high as one's spear. This is about 20 minutes after the sun rises, and its time remains until the sun reaches its zenith. So footnote 222. The duha prayer time begins after the sun rises a distance of 1 Arabic spear, approximately 8 cubits, which is around 10 feet, approximately 20 minutes after sunrise, and remains until the dhuhr prayer starts. So here's a typo, it should say remains, but it's misspelled. The minimum rak'ah to pray it is 2 rak'ahs, and some said the most is 12. The author said, the duha prayer can be prayed at least 2 rak'ah. One more sentence. This is about 20 minutes after the sun rises, and its time remains until the sun reaches its zenith. The duha prayer can be prayed at least 2 rak'ah, and it is better to pray it 4, but the best is to pray it 8 rak'ah. It is sunnah to pray it in pairs of 2 rak'ah. One can also pray it in 4 rak'ah, and then another 4 rak'ah. So mashallah, look at all these sunnah prayers that are available for the Muslim to pray, and that are specifically designated. And still, even like other than these prayers, you can just stand up and pray 2 rak'ahs. You can just stand up and say Allahu Akbar with the intention of praying 2 sunnah rak'ahs. Not the night prayer, not tarawih, not duha, not any of these like designated sunnahs. It is sunnah to pray optional prayers each night among the nights of Ramadan. The least number for those optional prayers is 2 rak'ah. There is no specific limit for the maximum number. So it is permissible to pray at night during any night of Ramadan 2 rak'ah, or 4 or 6 or more than that, 26, 40, 100, etc. The rule is that this night prayer during the month of Ramadan is prayed each 2 rak'ah with taslim and so on. And he was saying Assalamu alaikum. And we will leave the next part for the next lesson. We reach page 139, still going over the the sunnah prayers, details about the sunnah prayers. And then the next chapter would be conditions of prayer before commencement, before starting the prayer. So mashallah, we're getting into these details of the prayer because, like we mentioned, the prayer is the greatest obligation after having the correct belief. So it's befitting of the Muslim to maximize on his ability to get reward for the prayer. And his heart should really be attached to prayer. And for the Muslim that wants to be righteous, he wants to reach to the state of being a saint in Islam, then he has to follow this path. The path of the prayers, by perfecting the obligatory prayer and then putting the effort to be consistent on the recommended prayers, especially praying at night after going to sleep. We'll stop here for today. If there are no questions, we'll conclude. So this book, I'll put the link in the chat again. It's called The Explanation of Metin Abu Shujā. It is published by Toiba Books. This is an official book. It has a barcode. I'll put the link in the chat for those that want to order it. You can order it online, or if you want to get it in person, just head down to the Musalla of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, located in Philadelphia. I forget the address. It's on 45th and Walnut Street in Philadelphia, in West Philadelphia. You can go in and get it there, and also you can pick it up at Masjid Omar, which is in Upper Darby, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. But I'll put the link here. It's toibabooks.com. You can order it. I think the link is, it's a functioning link. You can hit it right from the chat. Takes you right to their main page. Let me actually put a link to that book from here. So we have, so the link that I put is the general link to that site, which you can find the book there. And then this second link that I put there, that is the link directly to that book. So you hit that link, you do the internet stuff, order it online, etc., and you can have a physical copy of the book. It is called The Explanation of Matan Abu Shujā. It is very thick. This is how far we got so far. But remember, after we finish the whatever is related to the prayer, we're going to skip to the chapters that usually we don't get to go to. We don't get to finish them or study them in English because we don't have. This is like the first time I've seen a book this precise and correct that has been written, and in the entire, let's say, all the chapters of the Islamic law. So we can start after the chapter of the prayer. We can start. We can skip over fasting. We can skip over zakah. We can skip over contracts and dealings. We can skip over hajj. We could skip over the inheritance and the will, or maybe we'll start from there. But then we can go to the chapter of assaults, the types of assault, and what has to be paid. We can go to the chapter of prescribed punishments, the punishment for fornication, the punishment for accusing a person of fornication, the punishment for drinking alcohol, the punishment for theft, and in all the details involved. We can go to the chapter of jihad, the obligatory jihad, war of spoils, division of the spoils, paying the jizya, and all the details associated with that. We can go to the chapter of hunting and slaughtering. We can go to the chapter of racing and shooting, and shooting arrows. We can go to the chapter of oaths and vows. We can go to the chapter of verdicts and testimonies. We can go to the chapter of emancipation. We're going to cover it. It's a thick book. This is a book of law, of the Islamic law. And it behooves the Muslim, it befits the Muslim to be well versed in it. But we're going over the purification and the prayer first because that's the most important for the person to perfect. Are there any other questions?